I had seen The Invention of Lying before. I think I first watched it back when I started to watch every Tina Fey film. And I vaguely remember liking it, but I couldn't really remember the film. And then I realised I'd never discussed it on here. I hadn't reviewed it before, so I had a really good excuse to rewatch it. And I'm glad I did, because generally I enjoyed it. There won't be spoilers to begin with. I will talk about it very briefly, but then I'll mention a couple of specific things with a spoiler warning that I either liked or that I thought were quite thought-provoking. This was released originally in 2009. It's directed by Ricky Gervais and Matthew Robinson, written by Gervais and Robinson, and stars Ricky Gervais and Jennifer Garner. We have an amazing supporting cast. Of course, we have Tina Fey, Jonah Hill, Louis C.K., Jason Bateman's in it, and Shaun Williamson and Stephen Merchant, and just really, really brilliant supporting cast. So on screen, there's always somebody who I think is pretty great. And I was never the biggest fan of Ricky Gervais, but actually I kind of have an appreciation for his comedic style now, much more than I did when I first watched the film. So that's another thing that worked in my favour with rewatching it. I probably liked it a little bit more now than I did then. And the film is about Ricky Gervais's character Mark, who is the only person who can lie. He lives in a world where it is impossible to lie, to the extent where they don't even have a word for lying or for telling the truth, because that's all they know. There is no alternative. And it's not just that they can't lie, it's that they have no filter. And that means the script is amazing. The dialogue is amazing. The characters, I'd say 90% of what the characters say are just baffling. Things that one would never ever say in public because they have no filter. And I think that that's tremendous. And it's one of those films where I just think they probably had so much fun coming up with all of these things that people would never say out loud. And it's just done in a way where everything feels natural. If somebody says something offensive to somebody, they don't look shocked or anything, because this is just what they know. And I think it's really entertaining and also very, very honest. Because I do think the characters are saying things out loud that a lot of us feel or think, but would never say out loud, because most people have filters, and it's really good fun. And then Mark realizes that he has this newfound ability to lie. He doesn't know that it's called lying, of course, because they don't have a word for it. But he starts to utilize this to his advantage. And over the course of about 10-15 minutes, we see him playing around with this and seeing what he can do with this. And then things get a little bit more profound. And I couldn't remember that. I didn't remember that from the first time I watched it. It's not what I was expecting. And I have a couple of thoughts on that. Not negative thoughts. Mostly positive. But definitely there are some interesting things that happen. It's a great concept. It's very well executed. I will say the final, not so much the final third of the film, let's say the final 15-20 minutes, I found those to be, that part of the film was just a little bit slow, a little bit dry. I didn't dislike it, but compared to the rest of the film, it definitely seemed to drop off a little bit towards the end. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. It's a fun concept with some really meaningful, moving moments and some great little nuggets to think about, and with a great cast as well. I can't really complain, and I definitely recommend it. So now, with a spoiler warning, I will mention some highlights and some things that I made notes about. So spoilers from now. One bit that I really liked, and I hadn't expected this to happen quite so early on in the film, is when Mark talked to Frank, because for about 10 minutes we see Mark being very selfish, basically stealing money by utilising this ability to lie and get all of the money. And obviously over those 10 minutes or so, he's acting like a bit of a bad guy. And it's important that since he is the protagonist, we need to be able to like him. And I think at the perfect time, even though I hadn't expected it, at the perfect time, things turn around. Because Mark meets Frank, who lives in his building. And we know that Frank is no longer wanting to live. And he says something about his plans to end his life. And Mark tells him, don't do that. And he says it would be a good idea if we spent some time together instead, and your life is worth living and all of these things. And because, in theory, they can only tell the truth, Frank thinks, oh, well, that must be the case. That must be, again, they don't have a word for truth, but that must be the reality of the situation. And we see Mark utilising this for somebody else's benefit. And there we have after he's been stealing a load of money and basically committing crimes, we then see him doing something really lovely. And pretty soon after that, that is amplified. And things get a bit religious. Now, what is interesting here is that I don't necessarily think we should have bracketed this under lies as such, but I'll get into that in a moment. But Mark goes to his mother's bedside. She is dying and she's scared, and this is the second time, first time with Frank, and now the second time we see the beauty in lying, the potential beauty in telling lies. Now, again, I don't think this is a lie. I'm spiritual. If you're not religious, then yes, you probably would think it was a lie. But Mark tells his dying mother that the afterlife isn't just an eternal void of nothingness. It is actually this place where you're happy and you've got everything you wanted and everybody you love is there and all of these beautiful things. I should point out that's not quite what I believe, but the fact is he was able to lie about what life was like in the afterlife to make her feel better. And if you're not a religious person, then you might think the concept of the afterlife is a lie. And if you believe that, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own beliefs. But the point is, even if you don't believe that it's the case, what is the harm in other people believing in it if it makes things easier? If it allows them to get through the difficult times, as we see with Mark's mother, what is the harm in believing in that so-called lie if it makes life easier and, of course, makes the transition into death easier? And I think that that's a really important message here. Obviously, as I said, me being spiritual, I don't think it's a complete lie. And I don't necessarily like the fact that on more than one occasion, and I'll get into that in a moment, it did seem like it was implying that all religion, well, Christianity mostly, is a lie. Because then people find out about what Mark said to his mother and they think he has all of this knowledge about the afterlife. And suddenly, in admittedly a very comedic part of the film, he's standing outside with these two Pizza Hut boxes with bits of paper sellotaped to them with what he allegedly knows about the afterlife. And he creates this story about a man in the sky who controls everything, and he's basically painting a very, very basic version of Christianity. And again, I don't necessarily like the fact that the film is suggesting Mark was able to say all of this because he's able to tell a lie, because that's therefore saying religion is a lie. And I think that's a very bold stance for a film to take. Nevertheless, there is some really good food for thought in there, because he's telling all of these people about this man in the sky who controls everything, and he will give them all of these wonderful things in the afterlife as long as they behave and they don't do bad things. And people start questioning, well, did he give my mother cancer? Did he do this? Did he do that? And Mark has to admit, well, yes, he did all of those bad things, but he also cured the cancer and he did all of these great things. And it's basically a 5-10 minute discussion on who God is and everything God stands for, and ultimately concluding that God does good things, but he does bad things to test us, and if you pass those tests, you will get happiness in afterlife. And honestly, that's a pretty good summary. That's a nice way to sum it up. Again, don't like the fact that Mark's able to share this because he can lie, but at the same time, if anybody's watching this thinking, well, how can there be a God if he does all of these bad things? The film actually supports the argument that there's a God by answering those questions and saying, well, actually, he also does good things, he does bad things to test you so that you can be rewarded. And I rather like that. So on the one hand, it seems very anti-religious. On the other, it seems like it's completely supporting, again, Christianity for the most part, and actually providing answers to the questions that cynics often have. And it's a very confusing situation to be in, but I think it did it very well, and I think it got the balance quite right, and I rather appreciate that. It's very, very, very well written. And we have a bunch of newspaper headlines at the end of Mark's speech about God, or he doesn't use the word God, but about this man in the sky. And we have a bunch of newspaper headlines, and one of them says, "Finally a reason to be good." And that's something else I loved, because again, let's say you think religion is a lie, fair enough, but what's the harm if it means that people try to be the best version of themselves because they think it will impact how they are judged in the afterlife? if you believe something that other people think is a lie, even if it is a lie, let's say hypothetically religion is all a lie. I don't believe that, but let's say that's the case. What harm is it if somebody is being a good person as a result of that? Obviously, we know there are certain people who are bad people under the guise of following a religion, but in general, I'd say most people who follow a religion do so because they think it's the right thing to do and their actions are good and they're kind to others, and that's a good thing. And again, it's showing, well, even if you do think this is a lie, it can have a positive outcome. Because I think when we all think lies, it's always a negative thing, but there can be benefits. And we see this at the very, very end of the film as well. Again, as I said before, the final 10-15 minutes of the film are kind of underwhelming. It's not that great, but I did like the last couple of minutes. And we have Mark and Jennifer Garner's character, Anna, and they now have a son. And her son lies about liking her cooking. He tells her a white lie. Again, what's the harm? So I rather enjoyed this one, and I think it raised a lot of interesting points. It does obviously present religion as a lie, but also supports religion and provides answers for a lot of questions that people who aren't religious might ask. It's a very interesting balance, and I think by doing that, it never completely takes a side. Great cast, really great narrative development. Yes, it kind of slowed down towards the end, but in general, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that I had a reason to rewatch The Invention of Lying. I thought it was a pretty decent film, and I'm very happy to recommend it.